Oh, look who crawled back from the ashes. You. Yes, you. The one they wrote off as crazy, unstable, unhinged, broken beyond repair. The one whose breakdown became their favorite bedtime story, their cautionary tale, their proof that you were always one bad day away from losing it. Welcome back, or should I say, welcome to the revelation. Because anyone's still here, still watching, still breathing after what you just survived. You're not the person who fell apart. Music. You're the architect who demolished the old foundation so you could build an empire they'll never understand. Music. And that right there, that's the secret they'll never forgive you for knowing. Let's shatter some illusions real quick, shall we? Because this needs to be said out loud. Carved into stone, music, tattooed across the sky. They saw you break down. They watched you crumble. They witnessed the tears, the silence, the isolation, the days you couldn't get out of bed, the nights you couldn't sleep. Music, the moments where you looked like you'd completely lost the plot. And they celebrated. Oh, they celebrated quietly, carefully, with fake concern dripping from their messages. "Are you okay?" they asked while taking screenshots. "I'm worried about you," they whispered while updating their group chats. They watched your breakdown like it was primetime entertainment, the finale they'd been waiting for. Music. The confirmation that you were exactly what they always suspected. Weak, fragile, unable to handle the pressure, destined to self-destruct. But here's what they missed. Here's what their tiny little minds couldn't comprehend. Here's the plot twist that's about to rewrite every assumption they ever made about you. Your breakdown wasn't a breakdown. It was a controlled demolition. You weren't falling apart. You were falling into place. Music, every tear was strategic. Every moment of silence was calculated. Every day you disappeared from their radar. Music, you were rebuilding in a dimension they didn't have access to, couldn't monitor. Music, you were rebuilding in a dimension they didn't have access to, couldn't sabotage. While they were busy writing your eulogy, you were engineering your resurrection. While they were planning your funeral, you were designing your coronation. And now they're standing in the aftermath, staring at someone they don't recognize. Music, someone who looks like you but operates at a frequency that makes their ears bleed. See, they thought breakdowns were endings. Music collapses, surrenders, the white flag waving in defeat, because that's what breakdowns are for them. When they crack, they shatter permanently. When they fall, they stay music, down. When life hits them, they fold like cheap furniture. So naturally they assumed you were built the same way, wired with the same fragile circuitry, destined to blow the same fuses. But you knew something they'll spend their entire lives trying to figure out. You knew that sometimes you have to burn the whole forest down to see what's been hiding in the shadows. You knew that sometimes you have to destroy the version of yourself that everyone expects so you can become the version they'll never predict. You knew that breakdowns, real breakdowns, the kind that crack you open and spill your guts across the floor, those aren't endings, they're excavations. And excavate, you did, didn't you? Music, because you didn't just break down. You broke through the lies you'd been telling yourself. Music, through the people you've been protecting, through the roles you'd been playing, through the masks you'd been wearing. through the expectations that were suffocating you, through the version of your life that looked perfect on the outside but felt like a prison on the inside. You dismantled it all piece by piece, relationship by relationship, belief by belief, until there was nothing left but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you actually are. And that terrified them. Oh, that terrified them more than your breakdown ever could, because a broken person they could pity, music could manage, they could control. But a person who broke themselves open on purpose, who weaponized their own pain, who turned their trauma into clarity, that's a threat they don't have a manual for. They watched you withdraw and thought you were hiding in shame, licking your wounds, too embarrassed to show your face. But you weren't hiding. You were studying them, studying the patterns, studying who showed up and who disappeared, studying who sent superficial comfort and who actually checked in. Music, studying who celebrated your suffering and who mourned your struggle. You were running the most brutal audit of your entire life. And honey, most of them failed spectacularly. They revealed themselves in your absence. Music, their masks slipped when they thought you weren't watching. Their true intentions bled through their fake concern. And you took notes, mental notes, soul notes, the kind of notes that don't need paper because they're burned into your memory forever. You see, strategic breakdowns require one thing most people don't have: music, the ability to stay conscious while everything falls apart. Most people black out during their breakdowns. They dissociate. Music, they numb, they run, they cope, they medicate, they distract. But you, music, you stayed awake. You felt every single second of that pain. Music, you stayed awake. You felt every single second of that pain. Music, you sat in the fire and watched yourself burn. Not because you're masochistic, but because you knew that the only way to kill what was killing you was to let it burn completely. No half measures, no saving scraps of the old life, no clinging to people who were slowly poisoning you. Music, you torched it all and stood there fireproof, watching everyone panic because they realized you weren't asking for saving. Music, you were doing the saving yourself, and they weren't included in the rescue plan. Now, let's talk about what they saw versus what was actually happening, because music, this gap, this chasm, this grand canyon of misunderstanding is where your power lives. They saw isolation. Music, you were creating boundaries. They saw silence. You were conserving energy. They saw withdrawal. Music, you were strategically positioning. They saw tears. You were releasing toxins. Music, they saw breakdown. You were breaking through. They saw weakness. You were shedding dead weight. They saw chaos. You were reorganizing. They saw music ending. You were beginning. Every single thing they interpreted as your failure was actually your upgrade in progress. And the fact that they couldn't see it, couldn't recognize it, couldn't comprehend it, that just proves how far ahead of them you already were. And here's the kicker. Here's the part that's going to haunt them forever. You let them think they were right. You let them believe their narrative. You let them spread their rumors, update their theories, convince each other that you'd finally lost it. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't correct them. You didn't post clarifications or send paragraph texts explaining your side. You just disappeared into your breakdown like it was a cocoon. And while they were outside taking bets on whether you'd ever recover, You were inside completely rewiring your entire music existence. The caterpillar doesn't announce its transformation. It just emerges as a butterfly and makes everyone who doubted it look foolish. You did exactly that, except your wings are sharper, your flight is higher, and your destination is somewhere they'll never reach. They thought they were watching you crumble, but they were actually watching you shed. Shed the people who only loved the version of you that served them. Shed the environments that demanded you stay small. Shed the beliefs that kept you trapped. Shed the guilt that wasn't yours to carry. Shed the shame that was planted by people who couldn't handle your light. Shed the need for validation from people who were never going to give it. Shed the parts of yourself that were built to please others and suffocate you. Every tear was a release. Every sleepless night was a purge. Every moment of silence was a recalibration. Music. You weren't breaking, you were breaking free. And the chains you shattered, they're still lying on the ground where you left them. Rusting, useless, music. Evidence of a prison that no longer exists. Let's get into the traps, shall we? Because this is where it gets delicious. This is where your genius really shines. While they thought you were at your weakest, you were setting snares they didn't even know existed. You stopped arguing. Trap 1. Now they have no ammunition, no screenshots, no receipts of you being defensive or aggressive. Music. You stopped explaining yourself. Trapped 2. Now they look insane trying to justify their version of events without your participation. You stop showing up to places they expected you. Trap. Music. 3. Now they're obsessing over your absence instead of living their own lives. You stopped reacting to their provocations. Trap 4. Now they look desperate, pathetic, trying to get a response from someone who's moved. Music on. Every move you didn't make was a trap, and they walked into all of them willingly, eagerly, because they were so convinced you were broken that they didn't realize you were playing chess while they were still learning checkers. And the strategy of it all is truly masterful because you knew something fundamental about human nature that most people ignore. You knew that people will always reveal their true selves when they think you're powerless, when they think you're down, defeated, unable to fight back. That's when the masks come off. That's when the fake friends stop pretending. That's when the jealous ones celebrate. That's when the manipulators lose interest. Music. That's when the opportunists move on. That's when the truth emerges. Raw and ugly and undeniable. And you needed to see that truth. You needed to know exactly who you were dealing with. Music. So, you created the conditions for them to expose themselves, and they did spectacularly, enthusiastically, without a single shred of self-awareness. Music. You see, most people waste their breakdowns. They thrash around in the pain, make impulsive music decisions, burn bridges they'll regret, say things they can't take back, damage their reputation, sabotage their future. But not you. You weaponized yours. Music. You turned your lowest point into a laboratory. You used your pain as a filter, your struggle as a test. Music. Your absence as a mirror. And what did you discover? You discovered that half the people in your life were only there for the show. Music. You discovered that most of your relationships were transactional. You discovered that the ones who claimed to love you couldn't handle you when you weren't performing. You discovered that your success threatened more people than it inspired. You discovered that your authenticity made people uncomfortable. You discovered that the life you were living was designed to make everyone else comfortable at the expense of your soul. Now they're scrambling, aren't they? Now they're panicking. Now they're trying to backtrack, rewrite history, pretend they were always on your side, pretend they always believed in you, pretend they never doubted you. But you remember, oh, you remember, every single one of them. You remember who went silent when you needed support. You remember who spread rumors when you needed grace. You remember who laughed when you needed compassion. You remember who disappeared when you needed presence. You remember who weaponized your vulnerability when you needed protection. And that memory, that crystal clear memory of who showed their true colors during your darkest hour, that's your armor now. Music, impenetrable, unbreakable, forged in the fire they thought would consume you. Let's talk about what happens after a strategic breakdown. Music. Because this is where the real transformation becomes visible. This is where your power stops being potential, music, and starts being actual. You emerge different, not just healed, not just recovered, but fundamentally altered at a molecular level. Your tolerance for nonsense drops to zero. Your ability to detect lies becomes supernatural. Your boundaries become walls that nothing can scale. Your energy becomes precious, reserved only for people and projects that deserve it. Music. Your time becomes sacred, no longer wasted on people who don't value it. Your peace becomes non-negotiable. Music. Protected with a ferocity that scares people who are used to disturbing it. You become someone new, someone they don't recognize, someone they can't manipulate, someone music they can't predict, someone they can't control. And that drives them absolutely insane, doesn't it? Music, because they were counting on you staying broken, staying small, staying accessible, staying the same. They needed music, you to be the person they could always rely on to shrink so they could feel big. Music. They needed you to be the person who would always forgive so they could keep betraying. They needed you to be the person who would always explain so they could keep misunderstanding. They needed you to be the person who would always stay so they could keep misunderstanding. They needed you to be the person who would always stay so they could keep leaving. But you broke that cycle. You shattered that pattern. You refused to play that role. And now they're standing there holding scripts for a play you're no longer performing in, wondering why you won't read your lines, why you won't take your cues, why you won't react the way you used to. Here's what they're realizing now, slowly, painfully. Music in moments that wake them up at 3 in the morning covered in cold sweat. They're realizing that your breakdown wasn't about them at all. Music. It was about you. About your evolution, about your liberation, about your refusal to continue living a lie just because the truth was uncomfortable. They're realizing that you didn't break because of them. You broke because you were ready to break free from everything that was holding you back, and unfortunately for them, they were part of that everything. Music. They're realizing that the person they thought they knew, the person they thought they could predict, the person they thought they had figured out, music, that person died in that breakdown. And the person who emerged from the ashes is playing a completely different game with completely different rules on a completely different level. And the traps keep working, don't they? Music, because you're not even trying anymore. And they're still caught. They check your social media looking for signs of struggle, but all they find is silence or strategic glimpses of a life they're no longer part of. Trap sprung. Music. They try to reach out with casual messages, testing if you're still accessible. But you either don't respond or respond so briefly that it's clear you've moved on. Trap rung. Music. They try to use mutual friends to get information about you, but those friends either don't know or won't music tell because they respect your privacy. Now, trap sprung. They try to recreate the dynamics you used to have, but you're not participating, not engaging, not giving them the satisfaction of your energy. Music. Trap sprung. Every attempt they make to pull you back into the old patterns. Music just reinforces how far you've traveled, how much you've changed, how completely you've transformed. You know what the most beautiful part of this whole strategy is? The part that music makes it absolutely genius. The part that elevates it from survival tactic to masterpiece. You're not angry anymore. You're not bitter. You're not resentful. You're not seeking revenge. You're not trying to prove them wrong. You're not waiting for apologies. You're not hoping they'll finally understand. You've transcended all of that. You've moved so far past the need for their validation, their acknowledgement, their comprehension, that they've become irrelevant. They're ghosts in a house you no longer live in. They're echoes. Music in a canyon you've already crossed. They're memories in a chapter you've already closed. And that music, that indifference, that genuine lack of emotional investment in their opinion of you, that's the ultimate power move they never saw coming because they were expecting anger. They were prepared for anger. They could have handled anger. Anger would have meant they still mattered, still had impact, still occupied space, music in your mind. But indifference is the void where their significance used music to be. Indifference is the silence that screams louder than any words ever could. Indifference is the proof that you've healed so completely that they're not even a scar, just a story, just a lesson, just a stepping stone you used to get to where you are now. Music. And they can't fight indifference. They can't guilt trip indifference. They can't guilt trip indifference. They can't gaslight indifference. Indifference is the fortress they'll never breach. And you built it during that breakdown they thought was your destruction. Let's address the elephant in the room. The question they're all asking but too proud to say out loud. How did you, music, do it? How did you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough? How did you weaponize your own pain? How did you emerge stronger instead of shattered? How did you transform while they stayed the same? The answer is going to frustrate them because it's simple, brutally simple. So simple they'll refuse to believe it. You stopped fighting the breakdown and started using it. You stopped resisting the pain and started learning from it. Music. You stopped running from the truth and started facing it. You stopped protecting people who hurt you and started protecting yourself. You stopped trying to save relationships that were killing you and started saving yourself. You stopped performing strength and started building it. You stopped faking recovery and started actually healing. Music. You made a decision that most people are too scared to make. The decision to let everything fall apart so you could see what was worth putting back together. And you know what you discovered? Most of it wasn't. Most of the relationships weren't worth saving. Most of the beliefs weren't worth keeping. Most of the patterns weren't worth repeating. Most of the people weren't worth fighting for. Most of the versions of yourself you were trying to maintain weren't even you. They were costumes. They were performances. They were sacrifices you made to music, keep everyone else comfortable while you suffocated. And when you let it all burn, when you allowed the breakdown to do its work, music, you found something underneath all that rubble. You found yourself, the real you, the uncensored you, the unapologetic you, the you that music doesn't need permission or validation or approval to exist. And that you, that authentic core self that emerged from the breakdown, that's the you they're dealing with now. And they don't have a playbook for music. They don't have tactics that work on someone who's already been to the bottom and climbed back up. They don't have manipulation techniques, music that land on someone who's seen through every illusion. They don't have guilt trips that affect someone who's released all false obligations. They don't have fear tactics that scare someone who's already faced their worst nightmares. They don't have anything that works on you anymore. Music. And that realization, that slow dawning understanding that you're immune to their old tricks, that's what's keeping them up at night. That's what's making them question everything. That's what's making them realize they lost something they'll never get back. They lost access. Access to your energy, access to your attention, access to your emotional labor, access to your forgiveness, access to your tolerance, music, access to your space, access to your future. They lost it all during that breakdown. And they didn't even realize it was happening until it was too late. They thought you were falling apart when you were actually falling away from them. Creating distance, building walls, changing locks, burning bridges, severing ties, cutting cords. Music, every day you spent in that breakdown was a day you spent extracting yourself from their grip. Music, and by the time they realized what was happening, you were already gone, already unreachable, already operating in a reality they have no access to.